The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart.
Hello and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity. My name is Bahia Yaksan. I'm a core alignment coach and a diversity educator, which means I coach and train organizations and individuals to identify patterns of bias that they know are harmful to them and to others, and better yet, cultivate new patterns of habits, and whether it's patterns in an organization or in your life that do create more belonging and more inclusion and do connect and align people better to their values and integrity. It's a healthy, helpful process that involves some work, but in the end, it makes everybody happier. And if you're interested in looking at sample classes or courses I teach, whether it's for an organization or one-on-one coaching, you can check out my website, which is called Know What You Want Coaching.wordpress.com. So today we have a very interesting show, thanks to one of my sisters and her husband. And my family supports me in a lot of ways, and they choose to be anonymous. So out of respect for their wishes, I won't say their names, but I have an awesome family. And some of them helped me connect with this guest, whose name is Bruce Redig. He is an author. He came to be introduced to me as an author. The show title is North Slope Frontiers, Culture, Climate, and Oil. I'm going to read a little bio now so you get a sense of him, and we're going to end up talking about more than the book, what that led to, and his environmental perspective and how it shifted, what he does now in addition to writing. So this bio itself will tell you a lot. Bruce Redig is the author of Refraction, I love that title, a biographical narrative that provides intimate insight into the power of big oil, the shadow of the Cold War of the 80s, the dangers of an industrial environment, living with fellow laborers in an isolated work camp, and growing threats posed by climate change. Refraction is a personal journey told in a series of reflections on a time spent living as a merchant marine in Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, one of the most remote destinations in the world and home to the largest oil field in North America. At the Community of Writers workshop, Refraction was described as a cross between Heart of Darkness and Into the Wild. The piece won the piece won first place at the 2018 San Francisco Writing ContestAwards in nonfiction, first place in the 2017 Chanticleer Book Review Awards in narrative nonfiction, and first place at the 2017 Pacific Northwest Writers Association Literary Awards in nonfiction memoir. So this is a good book. Bruce graduated from the University of Colorado with a Bachelor of Arts in Fine Arts and Fine Arts History. After working at several advertising and graphic design agencies, he founded Charter Advertising Design, Inc., and serves as president and creative director. He founded Charter Advertising Design, we already read that. He also works as a travel writer, photographer for the American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association, AIANTA, promoting tribal tourism, which will be very interesting also to hear about. Bruce, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Bahia. I'm Happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
You're so welcome. So there's so much I want to ask you about, and I'm wondering how you'd like to start, because I know we get to hear you read an excerpt from the book. Do you like to start with a reading first, or do you want to see?
Yeah, maybe I could just give a little bit of background. I think you've covered a lot of it, but basically, yes, I served as a merchant marine and laborer up on Alaska's North Slope, and where I worked at was about 200 miles north of the Arctic Circle, and that was where I learned a lot in my early 20s. And my memoir, Refraction, an Arctic memoir, recounts that time. So it's told through two different perspectives, that of when I was in my 20s and now years later looking back and at everything I learned. And, some readers, they commented that my book is really three stories or themes: the story of my personal journey, and then one of a story outside of the Arctic, and then the story of the human impact on the environment. You mentioned some of the awards that it's won. I've been very proud of the awards, but it won several first place and gold awards. But the one I'm most proud of, it won a silver in environmental and ecology. And that's the one I was like, all right, they get it. So it kind of gives a perspective of what I saw and how I feel about it now. So I can talk a little bit about, I was going to see if I could open up a slideshow. Let me give her a shot here.
Beautiful.
Oh, okay, great. This was my view from outside of camp when I was in my early 20s. So when I first went up there, I had no idea what I was getting into. We worked 12-hour work days every day of the week for about 3 or 4 months straight. And this was outside the window. I originally wanted to go up there. I was looking for an internship in geology, and I was looking for a job in the oil companies as an intern in paleontology. And my uncle had connections with the oil companies, and he got me a job instead on the tugboats and barges. This is the oil line, the pipeline looking down the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. It runs 800 miles all the way from Prudhoe Bay down to Valdez. And pump station 1. This is just, I wanted to show these photos because it just gives you some groundwork for the environment and the backstory. And when I was up there, my perspective on the environment was we heard a little bit about greenhouse gases, and just a little bit. Those were like on the back pages of newspapers. You didn't hear much more than that. So when I was looking around, this was under the pipeline. This is an Arctic fox. I saw the pipeline elevated in certain areas so that the caribou herds could migrate underneath it. It seemed like the oil companies were all being pretty responsible, as far as the environmental impact at that time. And here's a caribou in front of one of the drill rigs, and eider duck eggs out on the tundra. It's just such a fragile environment. I think that's the thing that hit me the most when I first went up there. There's beautiful flowers, wildflowers across the tundra, but you could tell it's super, super fragile. So anything catastrophic can, of course, damage it.
Wow.
Was driving by, shot out the window, and these are flares, gas flares, and I knew that couldn't be 100% great, but flaring now, looking back at it and doing more research, it puts a lot of methane up into the air, and flaring is still really big across the world. It's really bad in other nations as well. It just puts out a lot of pollutants into the air, and it's a gas that it can be captured, but it's not economically feasible. So they burn it off into the atmosphere. These were all the equipment that we were bringing in, were these big drill modules and containers that would come in, and we would offload them. But this gives you a perspective of the size. It was like a city when it floated in. In fact, they were welded right to the decks of the barges when we brought them in, and then they were offloaded and then went out into the Prudhoe Bay oil field. So that was our job. There's a crew working on the pump crew, and that was my job. It was to help do a lot of the offloading, and we also constructed islands We constructed Muckluck Island, which was one of the most expensive dry holes. I think it was 50 million. I can't remember the exact cost of it, but we built a gravel island out into the bay, and they did an exploratory drill, and it came up dry. But we did a lot of island building also when we were out there, side jobs. And this was another drill rig that was brought in. It was a SIDS project. It was made out of concrete, and it was floated into the Arctic. So that's just some of the pieces that I saw while I was up there. And again, at that time, I knew there was some environmental impact, but I didn't know how much. And you tend to justify it, and that's what the book deals with a lot. It's looking back, and even now, when we justify some of the things, monetize things, it's you look back and you go, oh, there's a better way to do it. There's just a much better way to do it. And it's hard because I know the money I made up there was good money, and I was very grateful for the job and appreciated the job and the people I worked with, and we were proud of the work that we did. And I've talked to other people that work in the oil industry now, today, and they are proud of it, and they are doing the best they can. But it's hard when you look at some of the environment where I was at, how fragile it was. And now they're looking at expanding into the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And it's just such a fragile area, and one of the most pristine areas in the world. And that expansion into more federal lands, into Forest Service lands and BLM, we've all heard the news lately about how they want to expand that. It did get shot down as of now, but on the coastal areas of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, they do want to keep pushing to try to sell leases along that area.
Wow, those snapshots really say a lot, and I appreciate your sharing how you're aware. And I know this is true of so many of us. At the beginning of something, we have an inkling, this isn't really right. This can't be okay, and then we justify and go on. I'm just curious, like I only got to read a very beginning part of your book, which I really liked, and I saw already in in the first 50 pages how much you listen to people, like how it seems like it's relatively easy. Not everybody has this skill set of like an interest in really listening to people and developing relationships that impact you over time. But I'm guessing that's how you learned about not only the environmental impacts, which you can say so much more about, but also how it impacted people's lives and impacted culture in that whole area. So I wonder if it's if you could talk about that a little bit, like how and when did your kind of environmental awareness shift, and then to the point where it changed you? Because sometimes we're aware of something, but we don't let it change us. Maybe it's too hard to face, or we're just not willing to make a change. But it seems like it's changed you. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can. And that might be a good point where I've got a 2-minute reading here I can do. It's from my chapter, Power of Oil. And that kind of gives a little background and insight into that transition that you were talking about. Okay, it's called Power of Oil. The barges that arrived during sea lift were huge, much larger than the ones in the AMF fleet. They were well over a football field long. When we walked alongside the first one, we craned our necks to the towering oil field equipment sitting on the decks. Pack-tight drill modules looked like large buildings void of windows, their steel walls painted olive drab. The floating city made me feel small. I could only fathom the amount of money put into getting all the barges and rigs to such a remote destination. As a teenager and later during community college, I had worked at a couple of Shell service stations, a mobile gas station, and 2 Goodyear shops. I serviced cars and performed my share of oil changes, and I couldn't estimate how many gallons of gasoline I had pumped. The oil companies were enormous, but I never fully understood how much power they actually yielded. As a mini city floated around us, I realized for the first time the true dominance of the oil companies. They could go anywhere in the world and do anything they wanted. The Prudhoe Bay oil field in total area remains the largest in North America, with a lifespan stretching as far as 2075. Major players have included BP, Arco, ConocoPhillips, and Exxon. In 1988, the Trans-Alaska Pipeline delivered 25% of all U.S. oil production. In 1989, 2 million barrels of oil per day flowed down the 800-mile pipeline south to Valdez. It's estimated that 347,000 barrels per day still flow, although it fluctuates. The Kapurek River oil field, about 130 miles east of Prudhoe Bay, is the second largest oil field in North America by area, producing approximately 230,000 barrels per day. The state of Alaska received a record $900 million for the Prudhoe Bay oil lease. It's difficult to calculate the exact profit that the oil companies have made over the years, but they continue to pay taxes to the state, its major source of revenue. I had never thought much about who called the shots in decisions affecting our world, and always believed government officials were ultimately in charge of most anything global in scope. The more I saw during my time in Prudhoe, the more I realized who controlled everything. I maintained a question authority attitude, but I was making excellent money working for a maritime company whose clients included several large oil companies. Proud of the work we completed, I wasn't in any position to bite the hand that generously fed us. At family dinner, my uncle often discussed politics with my brother, who previously taught U.S. history. Big industry runs everything, and always will, my uncle stated. My brother simply nodded his head in agreement. It made me wonder if society lost its way quite a while back. What were the consequences if big industry carelessly freewheeled along an unbridled and self-indulgent path? So those are some of the questions that were running through my head at the time.
Wow. Wow, very, very, very well said and shared. And I imagine not easy to grapple with. So what kept you moving in the like? Was it not until you were writing that all of this was? Often I feel like I don't process something unless I like sit down and write about it, and then it really brings things up. What about for you? Did it come through the writing, or did you hold it in your mind for a long time before you actually started writing it?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I had all these stories, and of course my kids would always say, "Oh, Dad's telling another sea story," you know. And you know, I thought, you know, I need to get these down on paper, but I always carried a little bit of weight as far as knowing that that money was made, or I had profited off money that went into building this oil reserve, or oil exploitation. So once I started getting into it, I wrote a short story about landing on a little Inupiat island where our boats got blown in an Arctic storm during the winter or the fall of one year. And I wrote a short story. It had to be it was a flash fiction. It was Cold Flashes of Alaska. It was published by University of Alaska Press, and they had to be under 500 words long. So it was a very short piece, and I had it published. And I thought, you know, I have all these stories, and I should put them all down on paper. I should get them into a book and put it together. And then when I started looking at it, I realized that I was a much different person. I worked up there for over 4 years. I was a much different person when I went in there as when I came out. So there was a definite arc there. So I thought, you know, this is a memoir. I don't know how to write a memoir, but I learned. And yeah, I think it was during that time when I started learning about reflection, not just putting down what happened up there and the stories, but what it meant to me, and now what it means to me now, where I dug a little bit deeper, and it came into fruition. It's like, okay, this is cathartic. You know, this is helping me understand and grapple with, you know, working up there and working with oil companies, and you know, it helped me a lot it gave me a strong sense of work ethic when I was up there, and it also helped pay for my deposit for my first house, and it helped me put me through college the last 2 years. I mean, there was a lot of great things that came out of it, a lot of good relationships, and people that I still keep in touch with. So yeah, but looking back and looking at the industry as a whole, there was a shift there. Looking What I was proud of, the company I work for, they recently came out with e-tugboats down in Long Beach. So they're headed in a good direction, and I could see things changing and the types of contracts that they're taking on. There's a solar farm they're working on back on the East Coast. They're diversifying. It's not just all lumped into the oil companies. So I was proud to see the company take that direction.
Wow, tugboats and solar farms.
Yeah.
Definitely sounds like a good direction. And how did you get, I don't know if you want to say more about that short story, but I'm curious, and again, you can flow back to any topic in this conversation, how you got to know the American Indian and Alaska Native Tourism Association.
Yeah, and that's another thing. I think when I was up there, it broadened my view of it strengthened my cultural awareness. I grew up in the Bay Area, East Bay, and so it was a diverse area where a lot of my friends were from multicultural, and so I felt comfortable with around different cultures. But I really didn't know that much about American indigenous culture at all, and the short story talks about landing on the island of Kaktovik, and I'll do it. Try to see if I can do a slideshow here too.
Yeah, the photos are beautiful.
There we go. Yeah, and this was the plane that we took out to Kaktovik. It was Barter Island, and Barter Island was part of the distant early warning system. It was at one time we had a lot of radars all on the Alaska coast that were pointed towards Russia to see indicate if any incoming missiles or aircraft were coming in. They monitored all the traffic coming out of Russia. So it was called the Dew Line. And so they had a airstrip out here. And it was also the site of Kaktovik village, an Inupiat village. And when we landed, yeah, it was a different world. This is the jawbone of a whale that was out there. And the Inupiat people, the Kaktovik, they still rely on whaling and polar bear. And they still carry on a lot of their traditional culture. These were the boats that in the camp when it blew out there, and they rounded it up. A lot of the crew rounded it up and got it tied up to and docked at the island. Didn't have a standard dock or anything. They put it up against the shoal, and it was there for the winter. So you can see where the drifts are. And that's actually a picture of me out on the ice. That became the cover of Refraction. You can see how desolate it is and just looking straight out at the Arctic. And this is the Brooks Range. I had mentioned a little bit about the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and the Brooks Range reaches into and across a lot of the refuge. And it's just a beautiful mountain range. You could see it on a clear day across from Barter Island. From Prudhoe Bay, it's way in the distance. It's hard to see. It's every so often you can see it. That's one of the things I wanted to kind of bring out too is the word. You mentioned the title Refraction. The way I got Refraction, it's and what refraction is. Refraction is a trick of the eye. Sometimes looking at the Brooks Range, it would look like it was floating in midair. And sometimes out at sea, you'll see boats or ships, and they'll almost seem to appear to be hovering above the water. So they're almost like floating islands out there. So it's a phenomenon that's been around, of course, forever. And in Italian, it's known as Fata Morgana. And it was believed that these mirages were like castles in the air or false land created by witchcraft, and it would lure sailors to their death. And I thought that was a really interesting play. So I use this mirage-like phenomena in a metaphorical context, distortion of what one might see or believe as compared to what might be a little bit closer to the truth. And that's how I looked at my experience up there. Sometimes you try to trick yourself into believing one thing, but in reality, it's much different.
Wow, that is an excellent metaphor.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and this was a camp in the distance, and you can see remnants of an older whaling encampment by the Inupiat when we were up there. And this was a friend we met. We were working on the boats one day, and a couple of the Inupiat came by on three-wheelers, and they didn't talk to us at first. And they had hired a couple of them to watch over the boats during the winter, and there was some food left over in some of the wheelhouses and everything. And I'm like, who are these guys, you know? And then anyway, they came riding by one day, and they look at us, and finally we waved to them, and then they waved back, and pretty soon we start talking with them and building a relationship. And I actually kept in touch with this one particular Kaktovik villager for a couple of years. We mailed back and forth. Since lost contact, I'm trying to get back in touch with him. But yeah, it was hard for me to imagine anybody living out there permanently. And I mean, this is their home. These are their homelands. This was in his backyard that you can see the whale meat on stretched out and being dried out there on that platform. And I still wonder why the dog wouldn't eat it, but they must have put him on a short leash for protection. And there's polar bear skulls he had out front also. And we went to a blanket toss. He invited us to a blanket toss and went into town, and we met several of his friends. The people were so inviting, and it just was a great experience. One of the villagers there, and you can kind of get a feel for Kaktovik and the background, the homes and the houses. And it just really kind of opened my eyes to a new culture. And from then, I started working in, my background is in advertising and marketing and graphic design. And I kind of started focusing more into rural marketing later on in my career. And then started working for the American Indian tribes out in Nevada, and do work for the Northern and Southern Paiute and Western Shoshone. And then our local tribe here is the Washoe of Nevada and in California. And I just loved working with them. And then I ended up getting a job at AIANTA, which is the American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association. So that passion for culture and learning, it's just continuing now. I also worked for a little while for the islanders out of Micronesia and the Marshall Islands. And I was out there for a while too. And I learned that culture, and that was just great because I also have an interest in nuclear proliferation. I look at the two existential threats of the world as pretty much the environmental threat, and then also nuclear proliferation. So I know they're two dark topics, but you know that it's important to know what's going on there. And Nevada is right in my backyard, and I'm aware of all the history of the Nevada test site and the testing out there. And there's also a connection to Alaska with it too that I bring out in my book. So when I was able to go out to Micronesia and visit the Marshall Islands, I learned a lot of the history out there too, and Bikini Atoll and the testing they had done out in the islands in the Trinity test. So that was very interesting. But my passion for indigenous, what we do at AIANTA is we help aid the tribes tell their story, share their story, because the stories have been told by so many people in the past, and oftentimes they're very inaccurate. So we team up with a lot of agencies like the U.S. Forest Service and National Park Service and BLM and National Historic Trails, Lewis and Clark Trail, the De Anza Trail running from Arizona up to San Francisco. I've worked on that project. And what it is we reach out to the tribes and discuss what they might want to share. And also it's an economic driver as well, because we help promote their businesses and Native-owned businesses as well. So it's really rewarding work, and I enjoy it, and I'm learning all the time, still learning.
That's the only way to be. I think there's just so much to learn. Well, that's wonderful. So you help promote Native businesses, and you are part of a team that helps capture stories that are from people who've lived the lives of Native lives, rather than their stories being told by others, which has been historically the situation for far too long.
Yeah, and that's a good example is Lewis and Clark, because everybody's heard the stories of Lewis and Clark, and they've heard a little bit of Sacagawea, but they really don't. The stories of all the tribes along the trail itself really haven't been brought to the forefront, and there's so many rich stories. And again, we share only what the tribes want us to share. Anything, it's all approved by tribal council. The board of directors of AIANTA are all tribal members, native members. So we're very, very sensitive to what is shared and what's not. And some of the tribes, they might not want to share their story, or they might not want to show certain areas. And that's, we respect that. And others, that the powwows are so big, and the arts and culture, we do a lot in promoting native arts. And we recently had a poster contest for the California Trail stretching across Nevada, and had a native artist. And so it portrays how native tribes in Nevada saw the settlers coming across, because you always see, they had a logo with the pioneer and the wagon train, and there was no, in the artwork itself, there was no depiction of the native people, going across. So yeah, it's neat to work with all the native artists and get their perspective on things.
That's fantastic. That's been sorely missing. I did go to the website, and it was beautiful. And I guess I must have put in what the AIATA, right? AIANTA. And it came up, American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association, and I really encourage listeners and viewers to check that out. And the ecotourism in the hands of the people is just ideal, right? So I just really appreciate that you're with an organization and that respects what the people want to say, what they want to share, what they don't want to share, and the decision-making power in the hands of the people. That's refreshing.
Yeah, and again, it there's that environmental, it dovetails into environmental efforts too. I do work for Nevada's Indian Territory, and they call it ecocultural tourism. And it's how we've all heard of cultural burns now too. The U.S. Forest Service is leaning more on the tribes to how do we do it the way that used to be done? How do we manage the forest the way they used to be? There's always been somebody here. It's never been 100% wild. It's somebody has lived here and maintained it. And, back in the day, it was with a lot of cultural burns and keeping the forest healthy and how to do that. And we're learning that's a better way. And those are the things we're trying to look back to. So I think it's exciting.
That's great. Really encouraging. And again, I encourage listeners and viewers to look it up. AIANTA, American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association. And I have interviewed some firefighters from a couple different tribal nations, and learned a lot about cultural burning and how, thank goodness, some U.S. officials are listening and respecting and learning and grateful for finally opening to knowledge that's, stewarded the lands for who knows how many thousands and thousands of years. I was just thinking, you can tell me what's on your mind, and then I can ask my question, but go ahead. You were about to say something.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I was thinking about in one of the book reviews, it talked about I think you maybe more than touch on the Cold Wars of the 80s. And I remember being very, very concerned about nuclear proliferation in the 80s. It was just like an all-consuming worry. And now we have new worries, which I'll share my feelings about as we wrap up. But for people who didn't live through that, can you say a little bit more about when we were living under that threat?
Yeah, well, amazing as it was, when I would drive across going to University of Colorado, going across Nevada, the testing was still going on. It was underground, but it was still throwing a lot up into the air. And I actually completed a project. I wrote a novel, and the background is with the downwinders and the testing of the 1950s. So I really went down the rabbit hole in doing research on it. And it's pretty incredible. You know, I think there were over 300 tests done out there, and the amount of fallout that went across the nation it's pretty astounding. What blew me away was how far it extended. You know, the Kodak company, Kodak Film, back in New York, I think it was in Rochester. Anyway, it was back east. Their film was being altered because of the radiation that was coming from the test in Nevada. And I didn't even realize it had gone that far. And it also drifted up into Alaska because of the way that the gyration of the earth and everything, a lot of it ended up there as well. So it's just, it's a heavy subject, but yeah, we grew up under that threat and the duck and cover drills and all that. And we didn't, think too much of it. And we thought, well, it's over with now. But, they wanted to renew testing. I heard just, a couple months ago, they said they were discussion on renewing testing or underground testing. And, the groundwater for the underground testing, it's starting to migrate south too. And there's little rural towns that are very concerned about it. I do a lot of work for rural Nevada. And, there's just, man, so many stories about how they wanted to really push atomic energy and the atoms for peace. They wanted to use it in construction and in constructing canals. And there's a chapter in my book, I talk about this too. They actually wanted to use nuclear detonations to create a harbor up in Alaska, and through a series of atomic explosions, and create an actual harbor out of it. So there's just some crazy stories, and the downwinders, I mean, a lot of them are still fighting, from and for damages. I think the Shoshone tribe still has a couple lawsuits for all the damages that the fallout had on their people. And from what I last heard, I think they might have received, or some individuals might have received $10,000 or $15,000. That's about it. And the cancer rate just shot up. It's crazy when you look at the statistics. And the farmers and the shepherds out in Utah as well. A lot of those sheep, and then it got into the milk, and then into the babies. The baby's milk. It just, it created quite a environmental catastrophe. That's for sure. And it's an invisible one. It's one you might not see, but it's one of the most dangerous ones.
And well hidden from us.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you digging into those stories and bringing them out to the light. It's just so we don't know what we don't know. I'm thinking it's just it can be very disheartening. So any acts that are constructive and contributive and support other people, I deeply appreciate, and I love showcasing it.
Yeah, I've got a blog too. It's called Changing Tides, and I've written a lot of different little excerpts on this. My daughter and I were out driving out in Nevada one time, and we found it's called a nuclear plug, and it was where they were doing experiments actually outside the test area, and it was out in some ranch land, and it was in the Atoms for Peace projects. They were looking at how it would shape landforms, which pretty much know how it's going to happen. And the shaft itself, then they filled with concrete, and they put a plug on top of it. They actually have a monument out there, a little interpretive sign talking about the project, but it just way out in the middle of Nevada, middle of nowhere, outside the test area.
Speaking of your blog, can you say for people who don't have the video right now but are listening, like your website or your blog, how people can find your book, reach you, any of that. Can you say that out loud?
Yeah. My website is brucereddick.com. And when you go to the homepage, you'll see purchasing options for my book. Um, my publisher's been great. They're an eco-lit company, and I was just really happy to find them. Really fortunate to have found them. If you buy directly from the publisher, which is what I suggest people to do, Amazon's great, and well, I won't say Amazon's great. My book is on Amazon, but I really like to promote small bookstores and publishers, independent publishers, and again, my publisher's an eco-lit publisher. It's Wayfarer Books, and if you purchase it from them, they're also hooked up with One Tree Planted. So if you buy my book through them, you're planting a tree too. So that's kind of cool. And yeah, and then
really
when
cool.
you on the home page also is my blog, Changing Tides, and you can click on there. I've got several years of material on there. I let it go this last year because I've been writing so much on this new project and promoting Refraction. So I want to get back to the blog because there's a lot to talk about right now. And when I started the blog, it was about in the same environmental and political atmosphere. So yeah, I need to get back to it.
Well, speaking of that, before I forget, I want to spell Reddick for people who are wondering, how do you spell that? That's 2 T's and 1 G, right? Bruce,
Yes.
RETTIG.com. It's right, is how people find your website.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was earlier sharing that I can get so discouraged. That's one reason I became a coach, because I know it's not, it doesn't move me forward if I sit there and wonder why and how did this happen, how's this going to be. Instead, I ask what can I do? What's next? How do I move forward? So I was sharing that what's our top officials are doing right now in this bill that's, I hate to say what it's called by the administration, but people probably know I'm referring to what's called the Big Beautiful Bill, which I've heard renamed as the Big Betrayal Bill, because it betrays a lot of promises that the President of the United States promised people. There's so much misinformation about it coming from even members of the Congress who are elected, who don't seem to have the courage to say no to the president for fear of their jobs, rather than fearing the consequences on the people, the constituents they represent. There's so much about that could potentially affect. Some numbers vary from 12 million to 17 million people could lose their insurance in the United States. Something around 4 million can lose, food assistance. And I'm usually paying attention. And then there's what's so-called like no more taxes on tips. That would be very temporary. I know that drew in a lot of like firefighters and hardworking people who heard that early on and voted for this MAGA group. But turns out that doesn't last long, and it's nothing compared to the tax cuts that will go to the wealthiest people. In short, if this bill goes through, right now it's back at the House, then it'll be historically the biggest transfer of wealth or any resources taken out of the majority of people and then transferred to the most wealthy. So I see there's a question, but I wanted to, I'll get back to you. You were the one who pointed out to me the negative impact on the environment in this bill that I wasn't even thinking about it. I was so worried about the social programs. But after Bruce answers this question, can you just say a little bit about the environmental impact in the bill? And then,
yeah, that's what's so interesting. I think you kind of hit on the nail on the head. It affects so many different aspects and so many different people. You're not even aware of some of the things that it's hitting. They just cut a lot of education programs to the tribal communities, and that's a treaty violation. And also they're trying to lump a lot of the tribes into DEI, which they're sovereign nations. I mean, they're pushing it as far as they can. And then on the environmental end, of course, I talked about ANWR, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and then they wanted to open up lands for land leases. Of course, I think that got shot down, thank goodness. But I'm located up in South Lake Tahoe, California here, and they wanted to lease out the land, or they had the plan to lease out land above Emerald Bay, which Emerald Bay is the most photographed area in the United States. And when I looked at that map, I kind of had to laugh, because I was like, they couldn't do that. This is just like pristine area. And then again, looking at the tribes, the Columbia River, they're trying to restore a lot of the salmon fisheries. Well, they've got the salmon fisheries going now, but the native salmon runs, which means also trying to take some of the dams down and doing things a little bit differently, looking at different ways to do it and how to do alternative energies. A lot of the tribes up there have solar power. They have big solar farms going on right now. So yeah, there's alternative ways to generate power and then restore the river and the salmon runs. Well, that funding got cut. So that's in litigation right now too. So yeah, I just agree with you. It's so wide how much damage this is doing. It's hard to comprehend.
Thank you for that. I want to just say one more sentence about that, and then ask Rebel to put up the comment again, because I want to make sure we respond to someone who sent in a comment. Yeah, just that if anyone, a lot of people don't know a lot of this information. And I think that I just want to encourage people to see what your representative is doing. I know it's hard when we have a lot of jobs, we're raising kids, but if you could take the time, tonight, tomorrow, before some representatives vote yes to let this through, it would be really important, because it could impact people for generations. Okay, so the comment is, Bruce, you are so fascinating to listen to. Thanks so much for your work in so many areas. I have to ask the fact that you've lived 200 miles above the Arctic Circle, Micronesia, and Nevada. Do you have a special blood temperature and skin thickness? Bahia, are you sharing that website? I will share the website also when we put up the podcast, but it's there's different ones. I'll put in the American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association website, and also bruceredick.com. And my own website is knowwhatyouvantcoaching.wordpress. But Bruce, do you want to answer that? We really have 2 minutes, so
yeah, I'll go fast.
And I need the last 30 seconds.
Yeah, no, just one other website real quick, nativeamerica.travel. That's our major tourism website for AIANTA, nativeamerica.travel, and there's an app as well. But yeah, I also traveled down to Nigeria, Africa when I was working as a merchant marine, and I saw a lot of ththings that was going on down there too. And I wake up a lot at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking, just thinking of these things and thinking, yeah, I think, Bahia, I think what you hit it on the head again with just saying, be aware, and getting it out there. If you see these things, and that's my book, it's not preachy. It just relates what I saw, and how I look at it now. And you can take it and read it. And I have people from, a lot of different backgrounds that read it and say, wow, I didn't quite think of it that way. So, yeah.
It's very helpful.
Years.
Very helpful. The more views we hear, the more we learn. We can use our own critical thinking to make our own decisions, but we really got to support democracy by if you have representatives in this country, please call them and make sure they're doing the right thing. So Bruce, thank you so much. Bruce Reddick, really great to meet you. I can't wait to finish your book. I also want to thank the viewers and the listeners in the comment. Thank you so much for that. Please check out the websites. I'll put them up with when the podcast goes up. They'll be in the description. And thank you, Rebel, our engineer, and Dean Piper, our producer. And may we all have enriching conversations in diversity this week. Thank you again.
Inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate